Hey fans, and welcome back to another issue of Marlins Deep Dive. We're here with head coach Jesse Lancaster, Jeff Roemer, and we're back for another exciting week of Marlins baseball. Well, it's been an interesting week. We've had a lot of things go on since we talked last week, and the first and foremost thing to talk about was what happened yesterday. The Coastal Plain League, along with the Marlins, announced that the regular season, due to the COVID-19 situation, would get pushed back to a July 1st start. Now, one of the things as an owner that we've really talked about was doing everything we can to make sure we play. We understand the importance that the Marlins organization is to not just the Crystal Coast, but to Morehead City and to the surrounding counties and areas. And we feel it's extremely important to get our kids back on the field, but make sure it's done in a safe and responsible manner. We want to make sure that our fans can enjoy a great night at the ballpark, but our kids get an opportunity to actually play baseball for the first time this year for some of them and get them right back on the field. Well, to get us started, we want to dive right back in and talk really about the 2019 postseason. Last week, we talked about the makeup of the organization and the team. We talked about the regular season, the 14-game win streak. You guys gave us some interesting perspective on that. But now let's jump into the first round of the playoffs. And Jesse, I'll really kind of start with you of coming into the 2019 postseason. It really came down to the wire where the last game of the season, we didn't know if we were going to face Holly Springs or Fayetteville. They were really coming down the wire. Fayetteville held the lead for most of the second half of the season, but Holly Springs really kind of surged late. And I remember the three of us really kind of talking, going, were we going to get Holly Springs? Were we going to get Fayetteville? Talk to us really kind of about your thoughts on how that was coming down.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, buddy. Actually, in both 18 and 19, those two teams were coming down to the wire. So it's been late in the year where we realized who we were going to play. I mean, literally down to the last day. I'd say as well as Holly Springs had began to in those last months. But going into that opening night of the playoffs, I guess some decisions we had to make. Our 1 and 2 were pretty obvious with Eric Miles and Connor Schultz. But we made a decision to go with Miles there. We couldn't go wrong, we didn't think, but we started Miles that game. He threw very well. And some things that parlayed into that decision was we knew we were coming close to an inning limit on Schultz, and we knew that if we got into the Pettit Cup playoffs, there was a chance we could roll Miles back out there. So there was a little bit of thought with that in place, but certainly not the 16-inning affair that we had the year before with Fayetteville.
That was a crazy night. I know for both you guys. I mean, 5 hours. I think it was 5 hours and 13 minutes that we were there. I mean, it was. You want to talk about? I say the highs and lows of baseball, going up, down, and then to watch Craig Lewis hit that ball into the right center gap and score the guy from second base. I mean, that was I say jubilation at its finest. But when we get back in, and obviously Fayetteville ended up beating out Holly Springs for that final playoff spot. What were kind of your thoughts going into that matchup against Fayetteville? I mean, they were a good, consistent ball club. It was a little bit different this year compared to last year, where last year coming into that first round playoff game, they hadn't beaten us all year. They were, I believe it was 0 for 13 against us all season long. And, you know, it was kind of getting a little bit scary. So it was a little bit different of a matchup this time.
You're absolutely right. Coach Anderson did an awesome job with their group in 19. And, I mean, they were playing good baseball going into that night. And obviously it was a good ball game. Back and forth, right? I mean, until late we started to pull away. But, I mean, we're talking 5-3 there. But, no, it was, I mean, obviously a tough matchup for us. A lot of respect for the strength of that club. They mixed it up on the mound a lot. They kind of, in some ways, managed a little bit like we did on the mound. So, kind of hard. I mean, we see each other so often during the year, we get a pretty good understanding of the lineup and an idea of what to expect late in ball games together. But, yeah, we're very, very known competitor there, obviously with Fayetteville. And Miles was sharp. I think we bridged the gap. And it kind of began the extended closing with Hinkie. You know, we did it again later in the playoffs. But we kind of fell into, you know, giving him the ball late in the ball game. We felt very comfortable in that situation.
And you're right. I mean, you mentioned obviously our starting pitching as one of the things that carried us. And JR, you talked about that really throughout the regular season, especially our strikeout to walk ratio and how good our guys were at throwing strikes throughout the year. And I think that really continued into the playoffs and really just getting that started. Jared, what did you see from that standpoint?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the repeat of the setup opening with Fayetteville and then Wilson in both years, that looks like a similar path on paper, but it couldn't have been more different with Fayetteville right off the bat, because after sweeping them in 2018, like you mentioned, they played us really tough all year. We were 5-4 overall on the year, 4-1 against them at our place, but they gave us both of our biggest losses of the season, 13-5 at our place and 14-2 at their place. And those two games also constituted 2 of the 5 games all summer in which we allowed double-digit runs. So, they certainly were not coming in intimidated or overwhelmed. I don't know that we had the psychological advantage at all, other than just being the home team. But then what else comes with that is we're the defending champs. We're the 1 seed. We're at our place. We're kind of the club that had everything to lose there. And so the game kind of played out, I think, correspondingly to that matchup all year. They went up 1-0. Then they were up 2-1 after 4 innings. Then we tied it up at 3, and then pulled away just in the bottom of the 8th. So it was a tense, uncomfortable game the whole way through. And we offensively strung together 13 hits. We had a couple of walks. So I mean, we had 15 base runners in 8 innings, but we were just never able to really cash in to pull away and take over the game.
And you mentioned that stat that we were 4-1 at home against them, and I think that was one of the biggest keys for us, really, in both 18 and 19, is that the path to the CPL championship ran through Morehead City. And I think when you look at how well we played both in 18 and 19 at home, I think those were huge advantages. I mean, Big Rock Stadium's not a fun place for a visiting team to come in and play, especially the way that our team has been built based on pitching and the things and the elements that Jesse and that staff really has. Big Rock Stadium has not been friendly the last 2 years to visiting teams.
That's the place we want to play. I mean, that's obviously pretty exciting that we were able to be home or have that home field advantage throughout both playoffs. And that really goes to, I would say, the magnitude of the crowds there and kind of the fan base that's kind of gotten behind us and rallied behind having a quality club on the field. So that's where we want to play our game, certainly. You mentioned the Fayetteville. I mean, we played a pretty well-rounded game that night. Like JR mentioned, 13 hits, a number of base runners. I think we kicked 1 ball, and it was late in the game. It may have been potentially the last out of the game, which extended a late inning, I believe. But
I think it was. I think it was one of the few times Kowalski actually kicked the ball.
Yeah, him, or it was at short, I think. It might have been little, I'm not sure, but it was late. And, I mean, what I do realize is they came in and hit 3 solo shots that night. So we had these number of base runners, played a complete ball game, and won a 2-run game. But fortunately, we were able to minimize their base runners, that those long balls, didn't break our back per se. They were all 3 solo shots, I believe.
Absolutely. And I will say a final note on Fayetteville. Lou does a great job. The Handelsmen have done a great job with that organization, and they will sorely be missed in the Coastal Plain League this year. And that matchup and that rivalry that we've had with them will sorely be missed. But, you talk about rivalries, you talk about a lot of things. You look at getting into the next round against Wilson, and you come to what I'll call a Marlin alum in their head coach of the Wilson Tobbs, it's kind of funny when you think about alum. There's history, obviously, with you, JR, from Edenton, and Brian being a player with the River Rats in our organization, and another great run organization. And you talk about a rematch again, it gets us right back against the Wilson Tobbs. So take us into round 2 and really how you were starting to prepare for that game and look at the dynamics of a Wilson Tobbs team that, quite frankly, had our number for a good part of the season.
They absolutely did. And you mentioned Coach Hill. I mean, Brian, we all 3 have a long-term relationship with that guy. And when they show up, you know what you're getting. I mean, you're going to get a club that's going to come after you. And like you said, they were a nemesis for us last season. I can't say we were excited to play them, to be honest with you. We were glad to be playing in the second round, and we were happy to be home again. But certainly, I think that late season win we had against them was huge psychologically for our guys, because Wilson had really done a number on us a handful of nights. And I don't know that we could get over the edge. They had this kind of bad boy persona about them. And, I mean, they totally believed that they were, I think they believed they were a better club than us because they had proven against us head-to-head they could have been. The big thing that night that I recall is Connor Schultz was extremely sharp. And as I kind of mentioned previously, we decided to opt with Miles in game 1 and Schultz game 2. That had a lot to do with JR's communication with Butler. We even had to request an extension on his innings, being that he would be more than 18 batters that night. But if he was sharp and within a decent pitch range, then we might could extend him a little bit. And that's huge. The communication I talk about that JR has with those placement coaches is tremendous. So that's kind of what I recall initially about that night is it was a very close ball game, and Schultz was very sharp, which got us deep into that game.
Yeah, so I mean, just building off of Wilson, absolutely, I don't think there's any other term for it besides they had our number last year. And obviously the sample was smaller being a non-division opponent, but whereas I would characterize our matchup with Fayetteville as them playing us tough all year, Wilson took 3 out of 4. And we got that last win at their place, July 21, getting the proverbial monkey off our back, like you had alluded to last week in the podcast. And I think that certainly carried over. But earlier in the year, they were a problem for us. They had a double-digit output of runs against us one night. They beat us twice in 3 days, which was our only 3-game losing streak on the year. I think you talked about that also last week. So again, just not necessarily a comfortable game. As you mentioned, the game itself. There wasn't a whole lot of offense. So 14 hits combined, 7 on each side. And we were able to jump out to the 3-0 lead and sort of take control of the game. So it had a different feel than, 2 nights prior with Fayetteville, where it was kind of one step up and then tie and then go ahead and then have to pull away at the end. And so offensively, huge game from leadoff hitter and second baseman Jace Mercer from the University of Cincinnati. He was 4, 2 doubles and a walk, just a great catalyst performance from him. And even though, we only had the 7 hits, it was still a long night, I would say, for the Tobbs pitching staff. And I think they were in a little bit of a tough spot in terms of availability and usage because of the way their season ended and then the game that they had to win 2 nights prior against the Pilots. But we were able to get 8 walks. And so, again, it was a lot of busyness on the bases and just never being able to kind of cash all the way in to put the game away. I think we left 11 men on base that night. But you mentioned Schultz and the pitching staff overall. Actually, I'll say the word defense. From the pitching to the fielding, just that whole component of the game really allowed us to not cruise, but get that early lead and stay in control and not ever be overly threatened. So we played error-free baseball. We ended up with 17 strikeouts off the mound as a staff in the 9 innings. 2 walks. Jack Harris gave us an outfield assist early in the game. One of those beautiful ropes that he, threw last summer from right field to third base. Also erased 2 of their runners trying to steal. So it was a suffocating defensive effort from us and really set us up.
I agree. And to add to that, JR mentioned we come out to the 3-run lead out the gate. And that obviously anytime when you're playing that big of a game at that point in the season, that's a luxury to kind of jump out to a lead and kind of take some of that nervousness off. But one thing that I noticed that we did in that game is that when we gave up that lone run to Wilson, we kind of took that punch, and the following inning we go back and punch back. And that's a big thing I felt like our club had last year is that the minute we gave a little bit of rope, I felt like our guys found a way to respond right away. And I think that's huge in killing momentum that the other team might be getting. So even though it was a 4-1 ball game, we go up 3-0, they score, we score right back in the bottom half of that inning. And I just think that's a huge momentum shifter to keep it in our direction, I would say. And then as you mentioned there, we went to Yackel earlier, who had kind of been a late inning guy. He came in the bridge time there. But it kind of led us to Ashton Raines, who was a swingman for us for the last 2 years. I mean, he started games. He's gone as a trailer. He's gone as a closer. That guy just took the ball anytime you wanted to give it to him. He was ready. So I was comfortable in him closing that game and going Yackel earlier for sure.
Yeah, and Ryder's appearance, Ryder Yackel, Harding University, another guy that we're excited to have come back for us this summer. He got 8 outs in the middle of that game. And it was so dominant. And I think the important component there is, okay, hey, we got the starter out of the game. A lot of times you're saying, hey, we're getting into someone's bullpen, fresh look, momentum switch. And Yackel just didn't give them any room to breathe. So 8 outs, 5 of them on strikeouts. And he did that on 38 pitches with a 78% strike rate. I mean, it was just attack, carve, pinpoint command, which we had, become accustomed to with him. And just a really impressive performance from him. And then that led into Ashton Raines, as you mentioned.
And that really kind of helped tie some things together. I mean, you remember back in 2018, I still remember Jesse getting tossed out of that game in the 8th inning and how different, like you said, you talked about how 18 and 19 saw a lot of similarities, but a lot of differences. I remember Markland coming in and that huge double play that he took in 18. You saw some very similar things coming down to the wire because Wilson threatened again late in that ball game. And I think it really helped that our back end of the bullpen was so dominant that it really kind of just shut anything that they wanted to try to do down.
Yeah, I think, you're absolutely right, buddy, is that there were some differences in the way the game played out from 18 to 19 with both clubs, but the intensity of the game didn't change a bit, I would say. I mean, it was intense from 1 to 9 with both of those opponents. And, you can't replicate a 16-inning affair or the type of game where, like you mentioned in 18, where I get ran. And quite honestly, it felt like it was slipping away. And then the next pitch, we got a line-out double play. Those scripts don't get replayed, but the intensity certainly was matched both years.
Absolutely. And on that note, you start talking about intensity and now getting through the first 2 rounds and getting back to our second consecutive Coastal Plain League Championship Series. And, we talked about relationships. It's funny, we go from a Marlin River Rat alum to another Marlin alum in Danny Higginbotham's team in the Macon Bacon. And, from our standpoint, I remember kind of going through going, man, this is going to be a long trip. And it was a long trek to Macon, Georgia. It was a long, long way to get down to that ballpark. But coming into that series, you had 2 very evenly matched. Macon finished second in their division, but came out and just smoked Savannah in their first round game and basically just blew through their half of the playoffs. They had one of the better offensive weapons on offense for them in their 3-hole hitters. I can't even remember the guys. It was
Carlos Estrada.
Estrada.
Offensive Player of the Year from Long Beach State.
Yeah,
absolutely. The guy could really swing it. But talk about coming into that matchup. We had really used some of our top end, and we went with a starter who had been with us through most of the year and had good numbers in Blomster, and we really gave him the ball in game 1, and it was a very unique type of game, especially the way it played out. First couple of innings, really no hits on the board for either team. So talk a little bit about the game and the performance and really the mindset of going with Blomster in game 1.
That was a decision that our staff and JR and I discussed. Blommy, he had been very good in the opening course of the 19 season. And he went through a rough stretch there where he kind of had a velo lull and he lost a bit of confidence in his fastball. Blommy's one of those interesting kids in this day and age. He's a right-hander that has plus off-speed stuff. His changeup is very good. And, the fastball plays up when he believes in it. And he just kind of had went through a midseason lull there where he was trying to find it again. So, honestly, that decision to go to him, I'm glad we didn't mess it up because I started to think through it and be unsure about it. But he wanted the ball, I can assure you of that. He did it all the right way, communicating with me. But there was some thoughts that go into there, like, is that really the guy for this opening game start? And, boy, did we make the right decision, right? Because he goes out there and he was as clean as he could be. Thankfully, too, because it was so late into that game before we kind of struck. So he just kind of, even though we came out swinging the bat, we squared the ball up pretty well. We were lining out the guys. That's a big ballpark down there in Macon. I felt like we were swinging it well on their starter, but we weren't able to really ever get anything going. And he even gave us a free runner an inning here or there, but we never could get him around. But Blommy went out there and matched him on the bottom half every time and didn't even like waver. I mean, didn't give him any momentum, I would say. Pitched out of some trouble, like a walk and a double play, I recall, but he was extremely sharp. The hard decision in that game was when to take the ball from Blomster, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I mean, I remember getting into, I believe it was the 6th inning, and really when we started to try to strike, I mean, we ended up scoring a run and didn't even have a hit. It was really kind of what we like to cause with havoc really along the base. And it really goes back to JR, something that you talked about is that speed kills, my man. Speed kills every single time. And that was really something we found ourselves in a situation of being able to swipe a few bases, work a double steal, and put some pressure on Macon.
Yeah, and buddy, I'll go back to the path leading into the series that you just sort of mentioned a little bit, but I want to give it proper weight. So the trip to Macon and just the entire structure and setup of the Coastal Plain League playoffs, and maybe that's not fair, maybe summer collegiate playoffs in general. So just because of the compressed series and the built-in guarantee to get both teams at least one home game, even though we're the 1 seed, we end up having to do the early travel and really the double travel. So we go on the road to their place for game 1, as opposed to traditional baseball where usually the higher seed starts and finishes the series and goes on the road in the middle. There just is not that flexibility at this level. So we make the 1,000-mile, 20-hour round trip to begin that series, whereas Macon is at home, they stay at home, they play at home, and then travel, knowing they at least have to come to our place for one game, if not both. And, that's a real obstacle at the end of the summer. Everyone's exhausted. It's hotter than Hades, and you're trying to play your best baseball with everything on the line. So, but just the game itself, Tyler Blomster, Colorado School of Mines, another guy coming back in 2020.
Great school name.
Yeah. And he just sets the tone, absolutely 6 shutout innings, 1 hit baseball, 8 strikeouts. And then, we weren't messing around there in that first game, and we went right to Henke again for the extended 9-out save. So on the mound, on the night, 10 strikeouts, 3 walks. We only faced 3 batters over the minimum because of a double play and a caught stealing. And again, even though we never, put up a lot of runs to say, hey, this game's out of reach, we're totally in control, we ended up with the 3. It also, I think, felt like to them, they could never get going. They were never able to just get that first run and get going. And just to shut out a club like Macon is a great accomplishment in itself. And just, again, going back to one of the earlier games in the series, in this first game with Macon, Henke and Blomster, 77% strikes, along with that efficiency, that we talked about. So it was just a real good first game. And I think, obviously baseball is a less physical game than football, but just something from my background, the takeaway for me in that game was we smacked them in the mouth. We went on the road, we did the long trip. I think every year, or maybe just the last couple of years, with the way we have run through our division, you hear these whispers and talk around the league. Well, the East Division's not very good. Yeah, Morehead City is, winning titles and putting together things based on other circumstances, not to their credit. And we'll see what happens when they come play, our division. And I think our boys just sort of announced, we're here to play and win this thing right away in the first game. So that was a great feeling.
It was a great way, obviously, to set the tone, really, like I said, to go on the road and shut down one of the better, higher scoring offenses in the Coastal Plain League. I mean, and you talk about that offense, and, that we go from game 1, a 3-0 shutout win. We're now set up for game 2 and game 3 back in Morehead City. And obviously us and Macon have to make that long drive back. And, it's funny, you obviously talk about offense, because we looked at saying, we're coming back home now. We're back to the Rock. We've played great baseball at Big Rock Stadium. I mean, heck, in fact, we were 6-0 at Big Rock Stadium over the last 2 years, coming into that in the postseason. Not to mention, you got your ace on the mound. We kind of said, hey, let's go for the kill immediately. And let's talk about game two. When you get into it, like I said, energy, excitement is there in that ballpark. And it kind of turned out to be a little bit of a rough evening that night. But Jesse, kind of talk to us a little bit about game two and where you guys were at and what you were thinking in that dugout.
Absolutely. So JR is absolutely right in game one. Our guys hear those things too. I mean, it's whispers around the league, but I mean, you even hear it on the social media or the in-game broadcasters that they slight the East Division. So you're absolutely right. I think our guys imposed their will in game one. And I don't think that we took Macon lightly in game two. However, we felt really good about being home, putting our ace on the mound and just finishing that thing right away. And that was no slight to who they were. If we punched them in the mouth in game one, they did everything but knock us in game two.
That's absolutely right.
That's fair, right?
Totally.
I mean, they give it to us that night. And to be honest with you, we show up excited, crowds there, and right there at game time, we get storms coming in too. So it kind of added a delay to the whole start, which in no way affected our play. I mean, they just completely outplayed us that night. But it kind of did put a damper on the waiting game of what we had hoped to. I want to say it was a Saturday night. We had hoped to finish it out in front of our home crowd, a big crowd, exciting. And it just it didn't play out that way. I mean, they absolutely handed it to us. And Miles, looking back on his start, I mean, they jumped on a couple of his fastballs. I think we found out after the point that they did some really good data research where they found out where in 0-1 counts or whatever, or 1-0 counts, he was fastball away a number of times. They jumped on his stuff, and he battled. I would think on any other given night we'd have stuck with him and tried to get back in the ball game, but we tried to slow it down a little bit in the middle innings, and we couldn't with some of the relief options that we used. And it kind of comes to the point of, well, there's a 3-game series for a reason. We're not going to lose tomorrow night because we're getting our face kicked in tonight. Basically, it's the kind of decision that you make in the dugout. And our guys, what you worry about is psychologically is, oh man, like how do we overcome this in less than 24 hours and show back up and play better baseball? But again, a testament to the 2019 Marlin Club. When that last out was made, they kind of laughed about the beating they had and was like, "Whew, glad that's over. We'll get them again tomorrow." So it was an absolute whooping.
Yeah, I mean, I think, in all fairness, it was just that happens in baseball, probably competition universally, but you see it in baseball because there's so many games and there's so many factors that can intersect and produce a product like that. And I think in retrospect, there were some conditions in place for that to happen. Obviously, you never plan on it. You're surprised when it does happen. But I mean, you take the 1-0 advantage. We get the travel day in between, come back to our place. We're feeling good, on the verge of sweeping the playoffs for the second year in a row, winning it in front of our home crowd. And, you just kind of take a breath, and huge credit to the Macon outfit, because after what had happened in game one, and we talked about all the positives for us on that end, then they had to travel. They had to come to our place, backs against the wall, and our pitching staff was rolling. Like they could not have felt great other than general confidence in their lineup, which was warranted. And as a team, subjectively, I don't know that we could even remember the last time we lost the game. And I went back and checked, and it had actually been 12 days on the calendar, which is an eternity in baseball, because we had the huge winning streak to end the regular season and then won the first 3 games in the playoffs. But yeah, it was a poor game all around. They hung crooked numbers on in 3 of the first 4 frames, and they jumped out to an 11-2 lead after 4, and they never came close to relinquishing it. And so, I think the silver linings that came with that were several. It got back down to earth a little bit. It forced respect for the opponent and set up the big game, but it also wasn't as emotionally taxing as if we had a gut-wrenching loss late, blew a lead in the top of the 9th, or failed offensively in a big situation, kicked a ball, where somebody could feel like, man, that's on me, I'm the GOAT. And basically, because the game went a certain way, we also didn't expend some of our top options out of the bullpen. and going back to the depth that we've talked about on our staff, in both years, it really almost allowed us to set things up for that third game and pull what I think was probably a greater advantage versus what Macon had to do on the mound themselves, based on where you're at in the series, the week, and obviously the summer in total. And it put us in a good place for a very dramatic, memory for the franchise.
And you talk about that, and like I said, in baseball, you get an opportunity to, hey, today's over, or you got to look to tomorrow, and you jump right in. And, let's take it into game 3 now. Obviously, we're coming off probably one of our worst beatings of the year in game 2. You're less than 24 hours from that. You're getting into game 3, literally. Everything is on the table that night. I mean, quite frankly, it's what I think everybody in sports loves to play for. You're in a winner-take-all game 3 of a series, championship series, tournament, the championship trophy's on the line. And Jesse, you probably made maybe what I think is one of the most interesting decisions in our playoff, maybe even history, where instead of going with a proven starter, you go with one of our bullpen arms in Leo Perez and kind of take a very different direction. I mean, as they say, there's no better time than the present, but nothing like going game 3, everything on the line. Now we're going to shift things up. Talk about that decision to go with Leo in the starting role, maybe instead of, Jack or somebody else that you guys had talked about.
Sure. As JR mentioned, losing the way we did in game 2, it allowed us some depth for game 3, but even still a third game of a series. And quite honestly, at that point, we didn't have a proven starter at that point. We had Jack, who we felt good about based on some spot starts and some extended relief that he had done. But again, this is a guy that hadn't been with us for 2 to 3 weeks, The deal with Leo, we had used him in that role a couple times as kind of an opener. And his stuff is dominant enough when good that he can run through the top of an order one time, that type of thing, and get us off the right foot. If I recall, I think they hit a leadoff home run of the game. So I don't think we got off on the right foot.
Second batter.
Miller.
Yeah, Jared Miller, the Notre Dame shortstop.
Miller did. So I don't know that we got off on the right foot there with Leo, but he made some good pitches that inning. And I think really the carryover there was, can we steal an inning with an opener here to get to our extended guy in Myers and get deep enough in the game where Yekel and Hinkie, who we had kind of used pretty good in that series already, see the finish line. I didn't want to come up short late in the game when we thought we could kind of steal 3 outs at the beginning of the game. Is kind of the thought process there. Now, one thing I just thought of going into the night after that loss, the biggest scare we had there was the Texas Rangers wanting to sign Hinkie away from us that night and get on an airplane the next day.
Yeah.
So that was the scariest part of the whole thing, I think.
and those are the things that people don't necessarily know that we have to look at and deal with. I mean, God bless the kid that, hey, the Texas Rangers called and wanted to sign him immediately, but hey, man, we need that back into our bullpen right there.
Maybe we should have opened him so we could get on the flight.
No, so I mean, I think this game worked out, in such a way that when you make decisions and deploy certain strategies and then it works out, you feel affirmed and vindicated. Like, hey, we thought this thing through. We trusted our guys to be put in certain positions, and this was just one of those games. Specifically referring to on the mound, and we talked at length last week about just the bedrock of our baseball operations and our philosophy with a deep and versatile pitching staff, and never bigger than in this game where we were able to make a non-traditional move, use Leo as the opener. Now, let's give credit where it's due also. I mean, Leo has starting experience at school. As Jesse mentioned, he had done this opening role for us several times. I think not since the first half of the summer, though. And it was something that we knew he was mentally comfortable with, and we could, steal some effectiveness, we thought, at the top of the order and allow the long guy, Jack in this case, to have a more comfortable entry into the game, only seeing the top of the order, once in the work that we projected for him to get us to the latter innings. And, Leo gave up that homer to Miller, who, one of the best players in the league, maybe the best all-around shortstop in the league, a very good player. But he did his job. He got 6 outs, 5 of them by strikeout, and by the time we turned the game over to Jack, we had started to add some offense and get control. And then Jack, you just cannot give him enough credit. And again, it was one of those things that just lined up. We had intellectually sort of played this out from when we acquired him, saw what he did in that short start against Peninsula, just the way he works, and felt like, hey, he can handle the moment, which is not always a given. You don't always have the background on these players in the summer about handling big spots and pressure. But he's got a great mental approach to the game and demeanor for it. And really, I think it came down to just confidence in his abilities, which translated to us believing him as well. But he goes 4 innings and allows us, our offense, to really just take over the game in the middle. And we were up 6-1, by the time he came out.
And Jerry, you talk about that, and it goes back to Jesse, like you had talked about with Blomster in game 1 of going, I remember one of the hardest decisions you had is, how long do you keep riding him? I mean, the way he was pitching, I remember it was very difficult. You kind of going back and forth in the dugout going, well, do I try to steal 3 more outs because that's 3 less outs that my bullpen has to get? Like, where do you go from there? I mean, that was really the tough decision you had.
It is, and in both cases, it was the same. It's hard to say stealing it if they're pitching that well, but if you don't, the decision is a lot harder to make before the mistakes happen than after the mistakes. And having guys like Yekel and Hinkie and being able to count outs on the scoreboard, that makes it a little bit more comforting to manage. I can assure you, Monster nor Myers wanted to get the ball up. And Myers had shown us a lot that Peninsula start. I mean, he showed good hitters out, 2 times the order. I mean, he was phenomenal. Even in Leo back in 2020, right? So,
No question.
2 guys that have been there and done it. I mean, on literally the 3rd game of the Pettit Cup, so we're excited about that. But, yeah, it's hard to take balls away from pitchers when they're throwing that well. But it's nice when you got Yekel and Hinkie in your pocket and you can count out. Blomster have seen
That's the thing, especially that we work to establish, those roles and expectations for the guys so that they're able to balance their competitiveness with, hey, I'm playing my part in the overall scheme of the team success and the team plan. But we ended up with the 6-2 win. We put up the 6 runs, but it was kind of a strange game offensively, even though we put up the 6 runs and we took control in the middle innings. It was kind of, death by a million paper cuts, because we ended up with 10 hits on the night, but only one of our players had a multi-hit night, and that was Hunter Shepard. And he actually was the only hitter in the whole lineup with an extra base hit, and that was just a double. So, I mean, we were stringing things together, which is not how it always happens. Sometimes you just get the one big hit or a mistake, that keys a rally. But, we were able to string together singles. We had 4 walks, and then it was another big night on the bases. After we stole 7 or 8 bases in game 1 at their place, we stole 5 on this night. And so, that just goes back to that idea of adding offense outside, the slash averages, where it's like, well, hey, how are they scoring that much, or where's all that pressure coming from? And I think after that first game, and then it didn't come up again the way game 2 went until game 3, our guys kind of smelled blood in the water, and we knew we had some favorable running situations, and we took advantage of it.
Well, and JR, when you talk about the running situations, one of the things too, if you guys remember back, that Macon chose to go with their backup catcher in game 1, who was not as strong and was not their usual starter. Now, they went to their usual starter in game 2, and then back in game 3, I want to say they either pulled him or did something, and it was enable us to start running a little bit more because the catcher they had was a little bit weaker behind the dish throwing wise.
That's absolutely right. Yep. And you don't know, being on the other side of the dugout or the other side of the lines, you don't know what goes into those decisions and why. If the recognizable number 1 was dealing with an injury in game 3, I do remember the substitution that occurred that you mentioned, Buddy, and I don't know if that was a pinch hit situation and they had an opportunity to maybe have a better at bat with the other guy, or if it was just, again, the toll that comes, with catching all summer in a league in our geographic area. So, but those were important advantages that we enjoyed. But back to the mound, we go Leo, then Myers. We're into the late innings. We feel like we've got control of the game, and everybody in the ballpark. I mean, hell, people 2 miles away knew it was going Yeakel to Henke, and those guys they were robotic, for pretty much all summer, but especially in the playoffs, and just the confidence that comes for the entire club, the dugout, the bullpen, when it gets to those moments and you're able to give the ball to those guys, you feel as good as you can in the pressure of those moments, especially the championship series with everything on the line. So, Yeakel gets 6 outs, Henke gets the final 3, and, the staff on that day allows 1 earned run, 2 total, but 1 earned, no walks again, and we struck out 11, and Yeakel got through his 2 innings on 19 pitches. Just, just video game efficiency. I mean, it's just not something that you see rarely ever at this level. Guys who have pro talent, they're working through being, an amateur player still and missing this pitch and consistency, repeatability of their delivery. But Yeakel was just an ace in that regard.
I mean, and it kind of makes you think a little bit back talking about that, JR. Think about what the Yankees must have felt like getting into the, 98, 99 seasons when you've got Mo in that back end, and just, you're right. It's that great feeling of going, hey man, I've got a lead with 6 outs to go, and I got my guys. They're coming in. I mean, that's just, we knew what we were getting. And I think really that was a common thread between that 18 and that 19 team of those bullpens and how strong they were. I mean, we knew in both years, if we were going to get beat, we were going to beat with our guys, and our guys were just so good.
No, that's exactly right. And Jesse, you can speak to this. I'll kind of set it up. I mean, I feel like when you get to that point in the game and you have that certain personnel, the track record and the confidence level, as a manager, you feel like, okay, I've done what I can do, and we've gotten to this point in the game, and I can't feel any more comfortable about the way we're going to let this play out. And if it comes to it, yeah, you're going to lose with your best guys on the mound. And that's going to happen, over a 50-game summer schedule, 160-game, professional schedule. There's going to be those moments. That's the nature of competition. But you take that shot every time with your guys.
You're absolutely right. I mean, as the manager, when you get to that point and you're counting outs with those guys, I mean, the pitches have to be made, the outs have to be secured, but there's almost a level of relief as a manager at that point of, okay, I'm going to get out of the way. This is the boys' game to win or lose. It's not going to be because I come up with something, strategic on my end. So there's a sense of relief, and just sit back and enjoy what's occurring in front of you. But I do think the level of comfort that the team feels at that moment, like JR mentioned, is a communication aspect of a full summer's work, of communicating with the pitching staff of, this is our identity. This is how we do things. This is different than college baseball, but this is how we're going to go about winning ball games as a staff. And the same goes with that base running. You mentioned that. I mean, there's no doubt that we've created an identity as an offense in Morehead City, and I don't want to call it small ball because it's not necessarily that, but there's a pressure style of offense that we've embraced, I would say, and I think that's a 50-game communication aspect with your club of who we want to be and how we expect to go about business every night. But JR, you're exactly right, man. At that point, you don't know that it's going to work out, but it's gotten as far as you can handle it as a manager, and it's fun to sit there and watch your boys go out there and compete, and it's certainly nice to see them succeed the way they did.
And Jesse, you talk about that small ball offense. I'll bring back another point for the two of you guys to hear a little bit more insight on. One of the things that we talked about in the last episode was talking about that shortstop position and how it worked out with having Kowalski coming in and playing outstanding defense. Now, Kowalski really went off in the playoffs, especially in the championship series. And Kowalski had a big RBI single early on in Game 3. But what was most important to me was you go into Little in a critical pinch hit situation in Game 3, and Little coming up with a huge hit off the bench. I mean, JR, you talked about how many different players had hits in the lineup that night. But I remember that was a really big situation in making that decision. Okay, am I going to sacrifice a little bit of defense for offense here? Is now the right time? Talk a little bit about that, how you really utilize that in the playoffs, because there were a couple times where you went too little, maybe late in the ball game to maybe get a big hit.
Yeah, there were discussions. I mean, at the third base and shortstop position going into the game, all three of the Pettit Cup games. And I would even say friendly same-side debates between JR and I in terms of what we thought gave us the best chance that night. And I think that we're happy with the way that it played out. Kowalski's defense had just been so suffocating. And with the way we pitched the ball, having a shortstop that can be that rangy and that secure and turn the double play the way he did, that kind of outweighed the offensive side of things. Now, obviously, he was a force in the playoffs, which was a huge plus to have a bottom-of-the-order guy as productive as he was. But then Little comes into discussion about starting at third, and then Reimold that came on late and had been solid over there. But they were throwing right-handed starters, which wasn't ideal for Reimold matchup offensively. But the idea of having a guy like Little off the bench where we can pick and choose the opportunities when they're there. When they present themselves and you're thinking ahead of time as a manager, you know when it's there. And so I felt good about giving him that at bat. I mean, it played into his skill set very well. And obviously, man, Little got in there and put his feet in the box and made it happen, you know. So a chance to pull apart a little bit that late. I don't often like to give up offense for defense when you have a lead, but we were in a position to pull apart a little better. And that was a huge at-bat and RBIs that Little came up with.
Right. Kowalski actually was one of my two, sort of concluding points to the series, because I think pitching was definitely the big trademark of the series win. And we've talked about some of the statistical highlights, but I mean, we had a number of contributors up and down the positional list, both offensively and defensively in the three games, not the least of which was Kowalski. So you got the same everyday Gold Glove defense that we had become accustomed to since we acquired him in the middle of the summer. And then in that game 3, it was actually a 2-run single in our first inning of scoring, and it took us from 2 runs to 4 runs. It was a 1-out bases loaded single, and that put us up 4-1 and really gave us that breathing room. And here's the thing. I mean, we talked about some of the adversity that he went through at the beginning of his tenure with us, but again, just credit to the work ethic and the mental fortitude, because he never let it affect his defense. He didn't quit on himself or the team and grinded. And then here he finds himself in the biggest spot probably of his baseball career and certainly of our 2019 season, and just comes through in a huge way. So here's the difference. We're up 2-1, bases loaded, 1 out. If he rolls into a double play, it's only 2-1. And Macon feels like they kind of got away with something there. They almost flipped the script on that inning where we could take control of the game or it could stay tense and close. And he hung in there and battled and got the big hit. The other concluding thing that I had was just, the 2 wins that we had in the championship series, the pitching staff was just, more than you could really ask for. So 2 games, 2 wins, 18 innings, 5 hits allowed, 5 hits in 18 innings, 1 earned run, 21 strikeouts, and only 8 base runners in the 2 games that we won. And that was just, they were in the forefront for us all year, and they were with us in the end. And that's a great feeling. And we try to set it up that way with the way we protect and deploy guys. And it was very satisfying for everyone to see it come through.
It probably wouldn't be fair if we didn't recognize the battery mate Miller in that too. If we consider what he did defensively in that game, or in the whole series. The whole series. And not to mention just putting the pads on for a 3-game set with that kind of travel. I mean, he brought that energy every night. He was a defender. He's a great communicator with his pitchers. And then even a guy like Ty Barclay that supported the decisions we were making and brought the same energy even though he wasn't in the lineup. So Miller did an awesome job behind the dish and in the middle of our lineup. But just to put the pads on every night was awesome.
You got a visitor.
Yeah, man. You heard the boys.
Yeah,
there we go.
We didn't talk about it either. In game 1, Zach Miller, 4 for 4.
Yeah.
Not game one. I'm sorry. Game one of the playoffs. So the Fayetteville game, which of all of our 4 wins in the playoffs, the Fayetteville game was probably the most tense and closely contested. And on top of what he was doing, really all down the stretch, and then hugely so during the playoffs, to get that kind of offense from a catcher, just a great value add.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and he had numerous big situations throwing guys out. I mean, when you look in game 1 and even into game 3, I think Macon just really kind of felt, hey, we don't even waste your time running, because, I mean, it wasn't like bang, bang. He was throwing them out by 2-3 steps.
Yeah.
I mean,
the battery was doing a great job.
They were big-time throws in tough situations. Come see him in 2020, right? Another Marlin.
Absolutely. A lot of the gang is back, so if you enjoy 2019.
And that'll be a great way to kind of segment into things. And obviously, that game 3 win really capped off just another amazing season in Morehead City. The fan base that night was phenomenal to get a chance to see us win our 2nd consecutive championship, and to be able to win both of them at home has been even more special. And obviously to be able to do it with you two gentlemen has been great. And one of the things that we'll talk about really and kind of wrapping things up is that there are a lot of things that will be coming out. We're going to start to release some of the 2020 roster, including players that are returning. One of the things that I don't think we have mentioned, and I mentioned yesterday in our Facebook Live, that I'm excited about, and I know both you gentlemen are as well, is that we're going to return more players to this year's Marlins roster than we have ever returned in the history of the Marlins organization. And that's something we're really excited about. There's a lot of familiar faces that are going to be coming back to grace Big Rock Stadium, grace our host families and our fans, and all of us could not be more excited. So within the next week to 2 weeks, you're going to start to see us rolling out some of our players that are going to be coming back to Morehead City with some in-depth profile on guys. And you'll start to see us continue to do more of these. We encourage everyone to make sure you please go on and vote on the hat challenge of what your favorite Marlins hat is. We just finished. Well, round 1 will actually finish tomorrow morning. We got our first upset, gentlemen, brewing today. So we had for the first time, we had a higher seed who's got a significant lead on a lower seed. So I think round 2 should get very interesting. Listening to all the comments from fans has been great as to what they like on hats. So we're really actually excited about that. And next week when we get in, we're going to start talking about that 2020 roster. We're going to start talking a little bit about some of the players that are coming back in, some of the makeup that we're getting into, and then we're going to even draw some comparisons to that 18 and that 19 team. And it's always fun to get into a debate on, well, which team was better? If the 18 team played the 19 team, where do you go? What's that pitching? You get a Zach Keenan matchup, and who you got going, is it a Keenan versus, say, Schultz? How does that matchup work in? You've got some great ones. So get ready, boys. We're going to have to start to discuss how that 18 and that 19 team are going to battle against each other. We'll also be unveiling some more things with the organization. New merchandise is going to be coming out on the website, constant new updates on things. So we thank you guys so much for joining us. We'll look forward to seeing each and every one of you back here. We're working on a few things for next week, so please make sure you stay in touch on our social media, our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter pages. We'll be releasing more information in the next days, especially about where we're going next week. But thank you guys so much for joining us tonight, and we'll look forward to seeing you guys in the coming weeks.